oh, if I can stay awake, and it's not you guys' fault. Anyway, it's cold up here, and prediction of snow. But we're in the eastern half of the state, which is desert.
Yes.
Not
I've been
green.
up there.
Yeah, it's not green on this side of the state because we got.
You're in West Idaho.
You got good onions up there.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And of course, there's debate open for this. That all of the fossils and rocks and stuff like that show that there's a God, but it's not at all like the normal Christian would think of as God. Because
what does it show, and why would we use the God label for it?
Right. Maybe define God, because I'm a little lost.
Uh-huh. Well, find them in the fossils and the rocks and the stuff like that that's been around for billions of years. And the fossils especially are in this because as life changes, he must have something to do with it. But it's taken billions of years, just as science shows.
Okay, so you just said he must have something to do with it. So that's a personification of God. We still kind of need you to define God, but also, when you say, you look at the fossils, it's clear that he must have had something to do with it. That's the exact opposite of the conclusion of evolutionary science. There's no need to propose any sort of God.
I believe in evolution, that he's caused evolution, and here's why. Because as the animals change from bacteria on up, some of them, for some reason, change rather rapidly, and we don't know why sometimes that this has occurred.
So I would agree with you that we don't always know why. But if the answer is, I don't know why, how could you possibly say, oh, the why is God? Either we know or we don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, that's true that I don't hold a 100% belief in my saying.
It doesn't need to be 100%. I'm saying you're reaching the conclusion that when we don't know something, God is the explanation.
I reached the conclusion that God might not be the explanation, but it makes more sense to me that maybe he is. But he's not a God that you can talk to and pray to.
How do you know that?
Have any effect on anything?
How do you know that? You seem to know a lot about God's characteristics, and we still. Who is this God? What is this God? And how do we know?
Effect, then how is it tinkering with evolution?
he has helped to guide, in some cases, not all, evolution.
How do you know that?
Well, because of the sudden unexplained changes in some evolution.
No, if they're sudden unexplained, then they're unexplained. You are offering an explanation, and I'm asking, how do you know that your explanation is the right one or reasonable?
Oh, okay. Well, I offer a theory on that then.
An actual theory? Or theory as in I'm pulling something out of my butt theory? Because theory in science is something completely different. It is the highest graduation point of an idea, and that has been tested and verified, et cetera. But go ahead, offer, because I'm confused.
Oh, well, I hope I can explain it, because it's just as simple as that it's my theory, not someone else's theory, I think.
Okay. How could somebody... we still don't know what your theory is, and I'll use that language for now. But how would we go about verifying whether or not your theory is likely to be correct?
I don't have an explanation for that.
Sure. So why would you believe it? If you say, I have a theory, I don't know how to possibly test it and show that it's correct, but I'm going to believe it anyway, isn't that by definition irrational?
I suppose.
Okay.
My Bernie theory is irrational, but it offers a possible.
How do you know it's possible?
Emphasize possible.
How do you know it's possible? Has it ever been demonstrated that God, however you're defining him, that the God you're talking about is a possible explanation?
Because there's no other explanation.
No. That is by definition a fallacy, where you're saying that something is true because it can't be proven false or hasn't been. So
then it
do you know every potential possible explanation for this conundrum?
No.
Then how do you know that there's no other explanation other than one you're reaching?
Well, I guess it's kind of like reading a comic book and assuming that what the Donald Duck did, and then the story ends. Well, what happened after the story ends in the Donald Duck comic book? Oh, this is my theory.
Saying it's your theory does not get us. So you have a theory.
We're more interested in what's true.
And you don't know how to test it. And you've acknowledged it that it would be irrational to believe this without knowing a way to test it.
Well,
now,
God can't be, the theory of God can't be tested, but
then how could you ever be rationally justified in believing it?
Maybe somebody smarter than me can test my theory.
I don't necessarily know that that's an issue of being smarter. It is until you. Let's say somebody smarter than all of us comes along and finds a way to test your theory, and they find out that your theory is correct.
Ooh, wow.
Yes. Does that mean that you are justified right now in believing that it's correct?
No, they'd have to convince myself that I'm correct.
You're already convinced you're correct.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm open for the possibility that I'm not correct.
Okay. Listen to that sentence. I'm open for the possibility that I'm not correct. By definition, that means you think you're correct and you're waiting to be proved wrong.
Okay, sure, that works too.
So you are now convinced, and yet you don't have a good reason to be convinced. So do you care about whether or not something's true?
Of course.
Well, you say of course, but people who care about whether or not something's true are not going to openly acknowledge that they believe something without good reason and are waiting to be proved wrong and hoping that somebody smarter comes along to prove that they're right. That's not the way reasoning works. If you care about truth, then your answer to this, hey, why does the fossil record show changes more to some species over a given amount of time than another? What is the explanation for that? Your answer has to be, I don't know.
But I offer that as a possibility, just like the Big Bang Theory.
Okay, I offer as a possibility species manipulating pixies. These pixies, every now and then in the course of our history, come in and manipulate some creatures more than others. Is that a possible explanation?
Yes.
How do you know that's possible? Wouldn't you need to know that pixies? What if it is impossible for pixies to exist? What if it's impossible for species manipulating, DNA manipulating pixies to exist? What if those in fact are not possible? You're now saying they're possible.
They're theoretically possible.
I don't give a rat's ass. If your model is indistinguishable from other things. Hey, how do we know it's not pixies? Okay, so you've agreed with me that it's possible that DNA manipulating pixies are an explanation. How do you tell the difference between your preferred explanation of God and the DNA modifying pixies? So now we have two possible explanations. You said that God was the right one because it was the only possible explanation, and now you've just acknowledged another possible explanation. How do you tell which of those two might be right?
By lots and lots of theoretical evaluation and testing.
Have you done any of that?
Just by plain observation and coming to that conclusion.
Yeah, that's not the way you test for something. And now you're in a position where you previously said there's no explanation other than God. And now you're in a position where you've acknowledged multiple possible explanations, and we just went with the first one. I imagine we could come up with a nearly infinite series of potentially possible explanations. And so you're picking one over the others.
But it's no different than the Big Bang Theory. We don't know, but that's our best guess.
It's not a guess. It's got a lot of evidence behind it.
The Big Bang model, even if it ultimately turns out to be incorrect, is currently the best explanation of all of the available facts, and there aren't facts that contradict it. Your proposed explanation of God did it not only has no explanatory power, it doesn't tell us anything about how God did it or if God did it, but you have just acknowledged that it's up there with DNA manipulating pixies. And so now we have two, by your own admission, potential explanations, and you're picking one. Do you have any data that shows that yours is more likely than the pixies?
I go to the John Day fossil beds, or I go to Crater Lake and look at the layers, or I go to the Grand Canyon and look at all the layers. Hey, look, I can see that these have changed over time.
It's like the work of Pixies to me.
Sudden change here, but not there.
You are describing the change when I'm asking about the explanation for the change. Going out and looking at striations in rock layers, that is observing the question. Now we want to know, what is the explanation for that? And you say it's God, and I say it's pixies. And we need to figure out which one of us is likely to be correct. So the question was, do you have data that shows that your God explanation is more probable than the pixies?
No, I do not.
Okay, then why would you believe that why would you accept that you have the best explanation when you have no data to support that?
I have the best possible explanation, not the rock hard explanation.
I don't think it's the best one.
Okay.
I don't think it's an explanation at all, let alone the best one, let alone a possible one, let alone the best possible one. You are looking at this, and you are beginning with the notion of stories about a God who can do anything. And so, of course, God is sufficient to explain the diversity of life, but the issue is whether or not he's necessary and sufficient.
Okay. You got me stumped.
Okay.
Let me throw one more thing in here. Just fast in evolutionary terms is like hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years. So
right.
It's relatively fast compared to whatever. But there's nothing that we have found in the fossil or DNA evidence that lends itself to a supernatural explanation. There are plenty of natural explanations that would meet that. I mean, I think it's unusual that it was relatively fast then, and it does beg for some sort of explanation or some sort of more research. It's an interesting question, but there's really no need for a God here.
Yeah, if you look at, for example, comparing humans with our closest shared ancestors, we know that one of the differences between us and great apes is the fusing of chromosome 2, and through detailed investigation, we can show where the centromeres and telomeres actually fuse. There's an overlapping thing there. And so we're making, as in all scientific explanations, an inference or an abductive inference to the best explanation. But it didn't have to be that way. It didn't have to be the case that we were able to identify a chromosome or a pair of chromosomes that were fused between us and what all the other evidence was pointing to as a shared common ancestor. And yet that's what we find. And the process by which those the DNA replication errors occur is entirely natural. It happens all the time. There's nothing supernatural about it. So you're looking at humans and saying humans are different from other great apes. And I think the best explanation for that is that God tinkered. And scientists are looking at humans and other great apes and saying, here's this fused chromosome, which is entirely natural. There's no need to suppose a God or a supernatural explanation for this. And yet you're sticking by God tinkered. How do you tell when God tinkered and when it was just natural?
You can't prove either one.
Okay.
So that's why mine is just a theory. It's just like a crime scene.
No, it's not a theory. I'm done allowing you to use the word theory in that way.
Sounds like a guess to me.
What you're talking about doesn't even qualify as a hypothesis because it's not testable. It is just a wild-ass guess. This is my preferred reason for this. It has no data behind it. It has no reason behind it, and it stands in the face of what we know. So if you've reached the conclusion that God tinkers, and you acknowledge that there's no way to reach that conclusion, that is by definition irrational.
Oh, okay. To me, it's kind of like a crime scene or accident investigation scene. And sometimes the investigator is right, and sometimes the investigator is wrong. Sometimes I'm
Correct.
right, sometimes I'm wrong.
And you know, when you're investigating an accident scene, you gather data, and then you look for potential explanations. And you do that by looking at a pool of known explanations. Any accident investigator who comes on a scene and looks around and gathers it up and says, God struck this car with lightning and caused it to crash into a tree, and then made sure that the person who was launched through the window landed safely without any damage, other than being dead, just boom, dead. You don't get to offer up God as potential explanations for those things. If I said to you, hey, socks have gone missing from the dryer, and I think God is stealing my socks, you would look at me like I had three heads.
No, it's Gremlins for sure.
Well, the investigation of Jack the Ripper, they think they've proven who it is, but because they weren't there, they can't prove it one way or the other.
No, not just because they weren't there. So, wow, this is so confusing.
Yeah.
The answer to the question, do we know who was Jack the Ripper? The answer is no, we don't know. We have a number of hypotheses that haven't necessarily proved out. And so we're in this position where the only reasonable answer we can give is we don't know. What if somebody came to you and said, I think Jack the Ripper was Satan?
Well, that's just as possible, I guess.
It's not just as possible. A being that no one has any evidence for, that we have no way of showing actually exists, we don't know anything about, we don't know whether it exists, how powerful it is, that cannot, by definition, be just as likely as a human being, which we know exists.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's not just as likely.
By the way, God is both the devil and who some people think he is. He's evil as well as maybe some good. If there is a God, and I kind of doubt, except a little tiny bit of way if I think of it.
I apologize. I apologize left and right, Bernie. I have no idea what to do with you because you've offered up God. You've offered up God as the best explanation for things that are all the evidence points to as being naturally occurring. You've acknowledged there's no way to test this. Now you want to, when we asked for a definition of God earlier, we didn't quite get one, but now God and Satan are essentially the same thing. Anything else you want to throw in there that's completely unfalsifiable, untestable?
No, I suppose I better stop while I'm
behind.
Not even ahead.
First rule of holes. Yeah.
Stop digging. I'll tell you this, and maybe this will help a little bit. I can absolutely appreciate, Bernie, the frustration with being in a position where we don't know an answer. And I can absolutely appreciate why some people are convinced that God is the best explanation. But the reason they're convinced of that is because someone has convinced them that this God claim is possible or likely to be true and can serve as an explanation. But the truth is, we don't know that it's true. We don't know that it's possible. And we have no evidence that it actually is an explanation for anything. It's a reason why it's indistinguishable from Pixies or, unicorns or whatever else.
And it stops you from looking for the right answer.
Well, I keep on looking, and that's my latest theory.
Okay.
I would start by going to Talk Origins on the web and looking at what scientists and experts actually have to say about evolution, about
talkorigins.org.
Yeah, talkorigins.org.
There's a lot of good information there.
And that will also get you to, I don't cry a river the second somebody uses theory in a colloquial sense. It's just we need to make sure we distinguish when you start saying that it's just as viable as Big Bang or anything else. Those things are not in the same category at all. One is a mathematical model that is the current best explanation of the origins of the universe, at least to the point where the math breaks down. And the other one might as well be a wild-ass guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the word
because
theory has different meanings.
More evidence for the Big Bang Theory than not.
And I have friends that are working on other cosmological models that might show that our current Big Bang cosmological model is not fully accurate. Yes, it explains things in much the same way that like Newtonian physics breaks down.
It's as close as they can come, and so my theory is as close as I can come.
No. It might be as far from the truth as possible. If you are accepting that a God tinkered when a God did not tinker, then your explanation is as far from the correct one as possible.
Oh, darn. I thought it'd be the other way around.
No. The closest to the best explanation right now is here's what the data are from scientific investigation, and this is the model that offers the best explanation. God isn't part of that.
It's just like proving who Jack the Ripper is. There's just a few pieces missing to prove who.
Okay. Anyway.
There's a few pieces missing in my theory to prove how these evolutionary changes sometimes occurred quickly.
So the question to ask yourself is, if there are things missing from your understanding, are they in fact missing from humanity's understanding? Some of the things that you think we don't have an explanation for, perhaps we do, and you're just not aware of it.
Oh, that could be.
So that's all I'm saying. I would advise you to go to talkorigins.org and other places and look into it and see what it is that other people think they know about this that you may not be aware of.
Yep. Going to the fossil beds makes your head scratch.
All righty. Thanks, Bernie. I appreciate the call.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know what to do when somebody's like, the devil and God are the same.